The letter of Aristeas, chapter 1.28. Set all mankind an example of magnanimity by releasing those who were held in bondage. After a brief interval, while I was offering up an earnest prayer to God that he would dispose the mind of the king, that all the captives might be set at liberty, for the human race, being the creation of God, is swayed and influenced by him. Therefore, with many diverse prayers, I called upon him who ruleth the heart, that the king might be constrained to grant my request, for I had great hopes with regard to the salvation of the men, since I was assured that God would grant the fulfillment of my prayer. For when men, from pure motives, plan some action in the interest of righteousness and the performance of noble deeds, Almighty God brings their efforts and purposes to a successful issue. The king raised his head, and looking up at me with a cheerful countenance, asked, "How many thousands do you think they will number?" Aristeas, who was still standing near, replied, "A little more than 100,000. It is a small boon indeed," said the king, "that Aristeas asks of us." Then Sosibius and some others who were present said, "Yea, but it will be a fit tribute to your magnanimity for you to offer the infringement of these men as an act of devotion to the supreme God. You have been greatly honored by Almighty God and exalted above all your forefathers in glory, and it is only fitting that you should render to him the greatest thank offering in your power." Extremely pleased with these arguments, he gave orders that an addition should be made to the wages of the soldiers by the amount of the redemption money, that 20 drachma should be paid to the owners for every slave, that a public order should be issued, and that registers of the captives should be attached to it. He showed the greatest enthusiasm in the business, for it was God who brought our purpose to fulfillment in its entirety and constrained him to redeem not only those who had come into Egypt with the army of his father, but any who had come before that time or had been subsequently brought into that kingdom. And I guess we'll stop here for the Judah reveals the story of his life illustration. It was pointed out to him that the ransom money would exceed 400 talents. I think it will be useful to insert a copy of the decree, for in this way the magnanimity of the king, who was empowered by God to save such vast multitudes, will be made clearer and more manifest. The decree of the king ran as follows: all who served in the army of our father against the campaign against Syria and Phoenicia in the attack upon the country of the Jews, and became possessed of Jewish captives, and brought them back into the city of Alexandria and the land of Egypt, or sold them unto the others, and in the same way any captives who were in our land before that time, or were brought hither afterwards. All who possess such captives are required to set them at liberty at once, receiving 20 drachmas per head as ransom money. The soldiers will receive this money as a gift added to their wages, and others from the king's treasury. We think that it was against our father's will and against all propriety that they should have been made captive, and that the devastation of their land and the transportation of the Jews to Egypt was an act of military wantonness. The spoil which fell to the soldiers in the field of battle was all the booty which they should have claimed. And the idea of war that I favor is certain things are extra, but you're not allowed to go to war with the purpose of land or treasure or slaves or even forcing conversion. So, yeah. To reduce the people to slavery, in addition, was an act of absolute injustice. Well, if it was a just war and they were doing that to stop the war, it just all depends on the context, right? Or how they actually treated the slaves, too. Wherefore, since it is acknowledged that we are accustomed to render justice to all men, especially those who are unfairly in a condition of servitude, and since we strive to deal fairly with all men according to the demands of justice and piety, we have decreed in reference to the persons of the Jews who are in any condition of bondage in any part of our dominion, that those who possess them shall receive the stipulated sum of money and set them at liberty, and that no man shall show any tardiness in discharging his obligations. Within 3 days after his publication of this decree, they must make lists of slaves for the officers appointed to carry out our will, and immediately produce the persons of the captives, for we would consider that it will be advantageous to us and to our affairs that the matter should be brought to a conclusion. Anyone who likes may give information about any who disobey the decree, on condition that if a man is proved guilty, he will become his slave. His property, however, will be handed over to the royal treasury. When the decree was brought to be read over to the king for his approval, it contained all the other provisions except the phrases, any captives who were in the land before that time, or who were brought hither afterwards. And in his magnanimity, the largeness of his heart, the king inserted this clause, and gave orders, and that the grant of money required for the redemption should be deposited in full with the paymasters of the forces and the royal bankers. So the matter was decided, and the decree ratified within 7 days. The grant for the redemption amounted to more than 660 talents. Could it be 666 talents? Kind of like the Solomon thing? Because it's more than that. So, for many infants at the breast were emancipated together with their mothers. When the question was raised whether the sum of 20 talents was to be paid for these, the king ordered that it should be done, and thus he carried out his decision in the most comprehensive way. Chapter 2, showing how the most careful records were kept of affairs of state, government, red tape. A committee of 6 is appointed to go to the high priest in Jerusalem and arrange for the exchange. Aristeas is put in charge of the delegation, and let's see how many. 48 verses. When this had been done, he ordered Demetrius to draw up a memorial with regard to the transcription of the Jewish books. For all affairs of state used to be carried out by means of decrees, and with the most painstaking accuracy by these Egyptian kings, and nothing was done in a slipshod or haphazard fashion. And so I have inserted copies of the memorial and the letters, the numbers of the presents sent, and the nature of each, since every one of them excelled in magnificence and technical skill. The following is a copy of the memorial, the memory of Demetrius to the great king. Since you have given me instructions, O king, that the books which are needed to be complete, your library should be collected together, and that those which are defective should be repaired. I have devoted myself with utmost care to the fulfillment of your wishes, and I now have the following proposal to lay before you. The books of the law of the Jews with some few others are absent from the library. They are written in the Hebrew characters and language and have been carelessly interpreted and do not represent the original text, as I am informed by those who know. For they have never had a king's care to protect them. It is necessary that these should be made accurate for your library, since the law which they contain, inasmuch as it is of divine origin, is full of wisdom and free from all blemish. For this reason, literary men and poets and the mass of historical writers have held aloof from referring to these books and the men who have lived and are living in accordance with them, because their conception of life is so sacred and religious, as Hecataeus of Abdera says. If it please you, O king, a letter shall be written to the high priest in Jerusalem, asking him to send 6 elders out of every tribe, men who have lived the noblest life and are most skilled in that law, that we may find at the points in which the majority of them are in agreement, and having obtained an accurate translation, may place it in a conspicuous place in a matter worthy of the work itself and your purpose. Now, translation and interpretation and legalistic interpretation aren't quite the same thing. You want a translation regardless too, right? May continual prosperity be yours. When this memorial had been presented, the king ordered the letter to be written to Aristeas on the matter, giving also an account of the emancipation of the Jewish captives. And he gave 50 talents weight of gold, and 70 talents of silver, and a large quantity of precious stones to make bowls and vials and a table and libation cups. He also gave orders to those who had the custody of his coffers to allow the artificers to make a selection of any materials they might require for the purpose, and that 100 talents in money should be sent to provide sacrifices for the temple and for other needs. I shall give you a full account of the workmanship after I have set before you copies of the letters. The letter of the king ran as follows. King Ptolemy sends greeting and salutations to the high priest Eleazar, since there are many Jews settled in our realm who were carried off from Jerusalem by the Persians at the time of their power, and many more who came with my father into Egypt as captives. Large numbers of these he placed in the army and paid them higher wages than usual, and when he had proved the loyalty of their leaders, he built fortresses and placed them in their charge, that the native Egyptians might be intimidated by them. And I, when I ascended the throne, adopted a kindly attitude toward all my subjects, and more particularly to those who were citizens of yours. I have set at liberty more than 100,000 captives, paying their owners the appropriate market price for them. And if ever evil has been done to your people through the passions of the mob, I have made them reparation. The motive which prompted my action has been the desire to act piously and render unto the supreme God a thank offering for the maintaining my kingdom in peace and great glory in all the world. Moreover, those of your people who were in the prime of life I have drafted in my army, and those who were fit to be attached to my person and worthy of the confidence of the court I have established in official positions. Now, since I am anxious to show my gratitude to these men and to the Jews throughout the world and to the generations yet to come, I have determined that your law should be translated from the Hebrew tongue, which is in use amongst you, into the Greek language, that these books may be added to the other royal books in my library. It will be a kindness on your part and reward for my zeal if you will select 6 elders from each of your tribes, men of noble life and skilled in your law and able to interpret it, that in questions of dispute we may be able to discover the verdict in which the majority agree. For the investigation is of the highest possible importance. I hope to win great renown by the accomplishment of this work. I have sent Andreas, the chief of my bodyguard, and Aristeas, men whom I hold in high esteem, to lay the matter before you and present you with 100 talents of silver, the first fruits of my offering for the temple, and the sacrifices and other religious rites. If you will write to me concerning your wishes in these matters, you will confer a great favor upon me and afford me a new pledge of friendship, for all your wishes shall be carried out as speedily as possible. Farewell. To this letter Eleazar replied appropriately as follows. Eleazar the high priest sends greetings to King Ptolemy, his true friend. My highest wishes are for your welfare, and the welfare of Queen Arsinoe, your sister, and your children. I also am well, and I have received your letter. I am greatly rejoiced by your purpose and your noble counsel. I summoned together the whole people and read it to them, that they might know of your devotion to our God. I showed them too the cups which you sent, 20 of gold and 30 of silver, the 5 bowls and the table of dedication, and the 100 talents of silver for the offering of the sacrifices and providing the things of which the temple stands in need. These gifts were brought to me by Andreas, one of your most honored servants, and by Aristeas, both good men and true, distinguished by their learning and worthy in every way to be the representatives of your high principles and righteous purposes. These men imparted to me your message and received from me in answer and agreement with your letter. I will Consent to everything which is advantageous to you, even though your request is very unusual. For you have bestowed upon our citizens great and never to be forgotten benefits in many ways. Immediately, therefore, I offer sacrifices on behalf of you, your sister, your children, and your friends. And all the people prayed that your plans might prosper continually, and that Almighty God might preserve your kingdom in peace with honor, and that the translation of the Holy Law might prove advantageous to you and to be carried out successfully. In the presence of all the people, I selected 6 elders from each tribe, good men and true. And I have sent them to you with a copy of our law. It will be a kindness, O righteous king, if you will give instruction that as soon as the translation of the law is completed, the men shall be restored again to us in safety. Farewell. The following are the names of the elders of the first tribe: Joseph, Ezekiah, Zechariah, John, Ezekiah, Elisha. Of the second tribe: Judas, Simeon, Samuel, Adias, Mattathias, Asclemius. Of the third tribe: Nehemiah, Joseph, Theodosius, Basius, Ornias, Dachis. The fourth tribe: Jonathan, Abraas, Adashah, Ananias, Cabrias. There's one missing here, it looks like. Of the fifth tribe: Isaac, Jacob, Jesus, Sabbataas, Simon, Levi. Of the sixth tribe: Judas, Joseph, Simon, Zacharias, Samuel, Slemus. Of the seventh tribe: Sabbataas, Zedekiah, Jacob, Isaac, Jesias, Nathaas. Of the eighth tribe: Theodosius, Jason, Jesus, Theodotus, John, Jonathan. Of the ninth tribe: Theophilus, Abraham, Arsamas, Jason, Endemius, Daniel. Of the 10th tribe: Jeremiah, Eliezer, Zechariah, Banias, Edishah, Dethaas. Of the 11th tribe: Samuel, Joseph, Judas, Jonathan, Chabot, Josephias. Of the 12th tribe: Isalus, John, Theodosius, Arsemas, Abiatis, Ezekiel. There were 72 in all. Such was the answer which Eleazar and his friends gave to the king's letter. And because there's multiple individuals called Jesus here, probably that could have factored why the Christians didn't include the story of the Septuagint in their rendering of the Bible. Although they were free to use, they thought it was okay to use Greek sources. So, Chapter 3, in which is described the most exquisite and beautiful table ever produced. Also, other rich gifts, interesting in the light of recent excavations in Egypt. Now, what these words would have been in Aramaic, because certainly they had no J sound, and Greek didn't have the J sound either, so probably just an E in place of every J. Okay, this is 65 verses. I will now proceed to redeem my promise and give it a description of the works of art. They were wrought with exceptional skill, for the king spared no expense, and personally superintended the workmen individually. They could not, therefore, scamp any part of the work or finish it off negligently. First of all, I will give you a description of the table. The king was anxious that this piece of work should be exceptionally large dimensions, and he caused inquiries to be made of the Jews in the locality with regard to the size of the table already in the temple at Jerusalem. And when they described the measurements, he proceeded to ask whether he might make a larger structure. And some of the priests and other Jews replied that there was nothing to prevent him. And he said that he was anxious to make it 5 times the size, but he hesitated lest it should prove useless for the temple services. He was desirous that his gift should not merely be stationed in the temple, for it would afford him much greater pleasure if the men whose duty it was to offer the fitting sacrifices were able to do so appropriately on the table which he had made. He did not suppose that it was owing to the lack of gold that the former table had been made of small size, but there seemed to have been, he said, some reason why it was made of this dimension. For, had the order been given, there would have been no lack of means. Wherefore, we must not transgress or go beyond the proper measure. At the same time, he ordered them to press into service all the manifold forms of art, for he was a man of most lofty conceptions, and nature had endowed him with a keen imagination which enabled him to picture the appearance which might be presented by the finished work. He gave orders, too, that where there were no instructions laid down in the Jewish scriptures, everything should be made as beautiful as possible. When such instructions were laid down, they were to be carried out to the letter. They made the table 2 cubits long, 1 cubit broad, 1 cubit and a half cubits high, fashioning it of pure solid gold. What I am describing was not a thin gold laid over another foundation, but the whole structure was of a massive gold welded together. And they made a border out of a hand's breadth round about it, and there was a wreath of weave work engraved in relief in the form of ropes, marvelously wrought on its 3 sides. For it was triangular in shape, and the style of the work was exactly the same on each of the sides, so that whichever side they returned, they presented the same appearance. Of the 2 sides under the border, the one which sloped down to the table was a very beautiful piece of work, but it was the outer side which attracted the gaze of the spectator. Now the upper edge of the 2 sides being elevated with sharp sense, as we have said, the room was 3-sided from whatever point of view one approached it, and there were layers of precious stones on it in the midst of the embossed cord work, and they were interwoven with one another by an inimitable artistic device. For the sake of security, they were all fixed by golden needles, which were inserted in the preparations in the stones. At the sides, they were clamped together by fastenings to hold them firm. On the part of the border round the table, which slanted upwards and met the eyes, there was wrought a pattern of eggs in precious stones, elaborately engraved by a continuous piece of fluted relief work closely connected together round the whole table. And under the stones which had been arranged to represent eggs, the artist made a crown containing all kinds of fruit, having at its top clusters of grapes and ears of corn, dates, and also apples and pomegranates, and the like, conspicuously arranged. These fruits were wrought out of the precious stones of the same color as the fruits themselves, and fastened them edgeways round all the sides of the table with a band of gold, and after the crown of fruit had been put on, underneath there was inserted another pattern of eggs and precious stones, and other fluting and embossed work, that both sides of the table might be used, according to the wishes of the owners, and for this reason the wave work and the border were extended down to the feet of the table. And they made and fastened under the whole width of the table a massive plate 4 fingers thick, that the feet might be inserted into it, and clamped fast with linchpins, which fitted into sockets under the border, so that whichever side of the table people preferred might be used. Thus, it became manifestly clear that the work was intended to be used either way. On the table itself, they engraved a meander, having precious stones standing out in the middle of it, rubies and emeralds, and an onyx too, many other kinds of stones which excel in beauty. Now, a lot of the meander lines of megalithic art and stuff like this actually relate to stuff about the brain and the rest of the body. Some of it relates to the, stuff that goes on in the heavens. Some of it can refer to ley lines and stuff. So, but a lot of stuff's referred to as just curio if people don't really know what's going on with it. And next to the meander, there was placed a wonderful piece of network, which made the center of the table appear like a rhomboid in shape, and on it a crystal and amber, as it is called, had been wrought, which produced an incomparable impression on the beholders. They made the feet of the table with heads like lilies, so that they seemed to be like lilies, bending down beneath the table, and the parts which were visible represented leaves which stood upright. The basis of the foot on the ground consisted of a ruby and measured a hand's breadth high all around, and it had the appearance of a shoe and was 8 fingers broad. Upon it the whole expanse of the foot rested, and they made the foot appear like ivy growing out of the stone, interwoven with acanthus, and surrounded with a vine which encircled it, and with clusters of grape which were worked in stones up to the top of the foot. All 4 feet were made in the same style, and everything was wrought and fitted so skillfully, and such remarkable skill and knowledge were expanded upon making it true to nature, that when the air was stirred by a breath of wind, movement was imparted to the leaves, and everything was fashioned to correspond with the actual reality which it represented. And they made the top of the table in 3 parts, like a triptychon, and they were so fitted and dovetailed together with spigots along the whole breadth of the work that the meeting of the joints could not be seen or even discovered. The thickness of the table was not less than half a cubit, so that the whole work must have cost many talents. For since the king did not wish to add to its size, he expended on the details the same sum of money which would have been required if the table could have been of larger dimensions. And everything was completed in accordance with his plan in a most wonderful and remarkable way, with inimitable art and incomparable beauty. Of the mixing bowls, 2 were wrought in gold, and from the base to the middle were engraved with relief work in the pattern of scales, and between the scales precious stones were inserted with great artistic skill, and there was a meander, a cubit in height, with its surface wrought out of precious stones of many colors, displaying artistic effort and beauty. Perhaps this was what we call a magical sigil, but upon this there was a mosaic worked in the form of a rhombus, having a net-like appearance and reaching right up to the brim. In the middle, small shields, which were made of different precious stones, placed alternately and varying in kind, not less than 4 fingers broad, enhanced the beauty of their appearance. On the top of the brim there was an ornament of lilies in bloom, and intertwining clusters of grapes were engraven all around. Such, then, was the construction of the golden bowls, and they had more than 2 firkins each. The silver bowls had a smooth surface and were wonderfully made, as if they were intended for looking glasses, so that everything which was brought near to them was reflected even more clearly than in mirrors. But it is impossible to describe the real impression which these works of art produced upon the mind when they were finished. For when these vessels had been completed and placed side by side, first a silver bowl, and then a golden, and then another silver, and then another golden, the appearance they presented is altogether indescribable, and those who came to see them were not able to tear themselves from the brilliant sight and entrancing spectacle. The impressions produced by the spectacle were various in kind. When the men looked at the golden vessels, and their minds made a complete survey of each detail of workmanship, their souls were thrilled with wonder. Again, when a man wished to direct his gaze to the silver vessels, as they stood before him, everything seemed to flash with light round about the place where he was standing, and afforded a still greater delight to the onlookers, so that it is really impossible to describe the artistic beauty of the works. The golden vials they engraved in the center with vine wreaths, and about the rims they wove a wreath of ivy and myrtle and olive in relief work, and inserted precious stones in it. Other parts of the relief work they wrought in different patterns, since they made it a point of honor to complete everything in a way worthy of the majesty of the king. In a word, it may be said that neither in the king's treasury nor in any other were there any works which equaled these in costliness or in artistic skill, for the king spent no little thought upon them, for he loved to gain glory for the excellence of his designs. For oftentimes he would neglect his official business and spend his time with the artists in his anxiety that they should complete everything in a manner worthy of the place to which the gifts were to be sent. So everything was carried out on a grand scale, in a manner worthy of the king who sent the gifts, and the high priest who was the ruler of the land. And there was no stint of precious stones, for not less than 5,000 were used, and they were all of large size. The most exceptional artistic skill was employed, so that the cost of the stones and the workmanship was 5 times as much as that of the gold. Chapter 4. Vivid detail of the sacrifices, the unerring accuracy of the priest is notable, a savage orgy, a description of the temple and its waterworks. We're going to have to find out more about the orgy when we get to it. 45. I have given you this description of 45 verses. I've given you this description of the presents because I thought it was necessary. The next point in the narrative is on account of our journey to Eliezer, but I will first of all give you a description of the whole country. When we arrived in the land of the Jews, we saw the city situated in the middle of the whole of Judea, on the top of the mountain of considerable altitude. On the summit, the temple had been built in all its splendor. It was surrounded by 3 walls, more than 70 cubits high, and in length and breadth corresponding to the structure of the edifice. All the buildings were characterized by a magnificence and a costliness quite unprecedented. It was obvious that no expense had been spared on the door and the fastenings which connected it with the doorpost and the stability of the lintel. The style of the curtain, too, was thoroughly in proportion to that of the entrance. Its fabric, owing to the draught of wind, was in perpetual motion, and, as this motion was communicated from the bottom and the curtain bulged out to its highest extent, it afforded a pleasant spectacle from which a man could scarcely tear himself away. The construction of the altar was in keeping with the place itself, and with the burnt offerings which were consumed by fire upon it, and the approach to it was on a similar scale. There was a gradual slope up to it, conventionally arranged for purpose of decency. The ministering priests were robed in linen garments down to their ankles. The temple faces east, and its back is towards the west. The whole of the floor is paved with stones and slopes down to the appointed places, that water may be conveyed to wash away the blood from the sacrifices, for many thousand beasts are sacrificed there on the feast days. And there is an inexhaustible supply of water, because an abundant natural spring gushes up from within the temple area. There are moreover wonderful and indescribable cisterns underground, and they pointed out to me at a distance of 5 furlongs all round the site of the temple, and each of them has countless pipes, so that the different streams converge together. And all these were fastened with lead at the bottom and at the side walls, and over them a great quantity of plaster had been spread, and every part of the work had been most carefully carried out. There are many openings for water at the base of the altar, which are invisible to all except to those who are engaged in the ministration, so that all the blood of the sacrifices which is collected in great quantities is washed away.